Good morning, students. Today we'll try to become familiar with the events of the First World War which took place in Europe as well as Russian Revolution. The European countries are eager to travel to distant places and have trade relations. They also saw that in Asian countries the kings were busy to expand their territories. So to help them, they tried to give some army to these kings, and in return they asked some things, either cash or a piece of land. And so in a very short time they were able to establish their colonies in Asian countries. They also came in contact with the African countries, and in Africa the people were black skinned and were very primitive. So these Europeans thought that we are born to rule these people, and so to expand their empire and to acquire the new territories in Asia and Africa, these countries started to either attack or by other means they started to establish their colonies and again to rule them. This greed for colonization only was responsible for the First World War also, and the economic conditions, the social conditions, and the cultural conditions of these Asian and African countries were completely ruined. So let us become familiar how the First World War came into existence and what were its events and what were its effects. Western Europe and colonization in Asia Africa. The Western European countries always wanted to expand their empire or territories in Asia also and Africa also. This greed only for establishing their colonies did not even leave them to attack their even neighboring countries. So in Europe also there was a race of ruling each other, as Spain had taken control over Netherlands, Belgium and Luxembourg. Also some provinces of it were captured by France. So also when the Portuguese king died without an heir, means no son, Portugal came under the rule of the Spanish king because of the blood relations. So for 6 decades, that is 60 years, the monopoly to establish colonies in non-European countries was with Spain. In the same way, Italy and Germany also became the victims of the greed of France and Austria. When these European powers were tightening their grip, trying to rule the Asian African nations, many of the European nations which had become free following the footsteps of England also made many of the Afro-Asian nations as their colonies. Colonization in Asia. When England established its grip over India and it had strengthened it, England also expanded its empire in Sri Lanka, Myanmar, today's Burma, old Burma, Singapore and Malaysia. England also entered in China, but due to the opium trade between England and China, there were wars which were known as Opium Wars in the world history, which took place in the year 1839 to 1842. Opium means offend, a narcotic drug manual. Now China did not allow to carry out the trade in the beginning, and so there were wars. The Chinese people, especially the boxers who were the origins, they also sacrificed their life in these wars. But China had to lose. In the beginning, China had to open its 5 ports to England and then 11 ports manual. So in this way, China also was defeated and had to allow the England to carry out the trade relations. And so in this way, England was able to expand its empire also in China. Taking advantage of China's weakness, even Japan, Russia, Germany, France, Belgium, and America also acquired trade as well as political rights. There were enormous oil reserves in the desert regions of West Asia, and so Europeans were attracted to also establish their colonies there. England, Germany, Russia, and America established oil companies in Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain and made efforts to take care of their own interest only. They always tried to ruin the areas where they established colonies, and only England or European countries should get the advantage. That was their motive. How did colonization spread in Africa? Students, this is asked as a question, so please try to underline. The Dutch were the first people to establish their colonies for the first time in the 15th century in South Africa. So the Dutch people were able to establish their colony in South Africa, and they were the first Europeans. After that, England and France also established their colonies in Cape and Algeria in North Africa. These vast provinces of Africa were very suitable to acquire raw material and also to sell their ready-made products post-industrial revolution, because of which European countries competed to establish their colonies. So now they were very much sure that whatever they require for their factories will be available from these countries, Asia and Africa, and they can also have their products sold in these countries with very high profit margins. King Leopold of Belgium seized the vast provinces of Congo and established his rule. Underline. England also established its colonies in Egypt, some provinces of East Africa, and some of South Africa. France also established its colonies in Tunisia, Morocco, and West Africa provinces. Germany also established an empire in some provinces of East and West Morocco, Africa. Italy captured the African provinces around the Red Sea, Spain and Portugal, and also seized some provinces of Africa. And so a conference for the European nations to divide these areas, their colonies, was held in Berlin. Different African territories were divided among the European nations at the end of the conference, and so the colonial dominance of different European nations was established over entire Africa. This entire continent, Africa continent, was very nicely divided by the European countries, and now they were ruling it. While on one hand the greedy European nations were trying to colonize various Asian as well as African territories, on the other hand, Germany and Italy had completed the process of its respective political unification. They tried to unify themselves, and thus unified Germany with Italy plunged into the competition of industrialization, commercialization, as well as colonization. These quickly changing global phenomena had exploited some of these countries politically, economically, and socially, due to which only their development had stopped. And when there is no progress, no development, automatically people will turn to revenge, to take revenge manual, and so only the First World War took place. Page number 11. Factors which caused the First World War. The First World War could be considered as one of the most heartbreaking and unforgettable events of the modern world because property was destroyed, lakhs of people lost their life. This happened for the first time in the world history. Please underline, the First World War began on 1st August 1914. Germany had defeated France in the Sedan War, and because of which France had to sign the Frankfurt Treaty in the year 1871. According to this treaty, France had to pay a war fine as well as give away two of its provinces, that is Lorraine and Alsace, to Germany. France had not been able to overcome this humiliation. So in 1871, when the Treaty of Sedan, Frankfurt Treaty, was signed between Germany and France, and France had to give away the two territories and had to pay a very heavy war fine. France was always thinking how to overcome this humiliation, and so this Frankfurt Treaty only was responsible for the First World War. The end of a war sowed the seeds of a future war. Economic factors. England had established its vast empire in Asia and Africa in the 19th century. England exploited the colonies economically and became rich. We know that the raw material cotton was taken away at throwaway prices, and in return we were compelled to buy the ready-made goods, the clothes made well, at very high price. So while purchasing raw material, it was at a throwaway price, and while buying a product made well, we had to pay a very high price. So we were exploited in both the ways. Their only intention was to exploit and to loot Asian countries. Also, because of industrialization and swift colonization, Europe required a huge quantity of raw material. And in the last quarter of the 19th century, Germany also started competition to procure the markets in Asia and Africa. Germany started supplying cheaper goods in comparison to England and France. The Afro-Asian markets that England and France dominated were so broken by Germany, and so there was intense economic competition between Germany and England. This was one of its reasons. Second, militarism. Military force was necessary and important to compete by the European nations. France, Austria, Russia started to expand their military power. Also in countries like Japan, Italy and Germany, compulsory military training had already started. Any person who was becoming a youth had to compulsory go through military training. Production of weapons was also increased, but the pretext was that we are doing it for self-defense. Thus, militarism got an impetus or speed up, and military competition added to economic competition created a serious atmosphere of war. Groupism or secret treaties. Groupism and secret treaties played a major role. The neighboring countries in Europe were not having faith, and so they tried to make treaties that by when I am in need, you help me, when you will be in need, I will help you. But still they were fearing each other. There was mistrust Manuel. The war was divided The world was divided into two groups before the First World War. On one side was the group of Germany, Austria, Hungary, Bulgaria, and Turkey. Please underline. And on the other side was the group of England, France, Russia, and Japan. Between these two groups, a feeling of jealousy, enmity, mistrust, fear, and hatred developed, and this only was the important factor to lead the entire world towards the First World War. Feeling of fierce nationalism. The independence of Belgium and Greece and unification of Germany and Italy were the result of nationalism. People were compelled that you will have to do something for their motherland, and so nationalism grew rapidly. We know that in India also the songs which created a feeling, सर कटा सकते हैं लेकिन सर झुका सकते नहीं, this is nationalism. So same way in Europe also this nationalism developed. But later on this feeling of nationalism only took an extreme and narrow form in Europe. Economic jealousy, competition, colonization in Europe had increased so much that the national interest of each other began to clash. Neighboring European nations now became enemies. Leading European nations began teaching extreme and destructive nationalism to the people. Love for one nation and hatred for the other nation was encouraged. The German chief Kaiser William was the originator of nationalism and colonization. Please underline this word. He was an over-ambitious and believed in world leadership. He wanted to get things done according to his will with the help of his grand military power. The feeling of war spread across other nations as in Germany, and this resulted in the First World War. Role of newspapers. The newspapers of these European nations aroused so much hatred among the people by their mutual, derogatory, provocative, and exaggerated, as well as false write-ups, writing materials by spitting venom, means poison, against the rival nation, that the rulers of the respective nations could not even make efforts to establish peace and harmony. So much actions were taken by the newspapers to pierce the ears of the people for nationalism, and they always, either by false news, tried to make the people that our country is in danger, we have to save it, and the neighboring country or the rival country is our enemy. So peace and harmony were completely disappearing from the European nations. Philosophy about war was another factor. Underline, the policy of war is welfare took root in Europe. The people were made to understand that if we will not wage a war, then there will be no welfare. Underline, the German writer Trotsky published the maxims like only the mighty deserve to live and war alone is the national need. Nietzsche, the German writer, expressed war as a sacred work. The events of the First World War. The Prince of Austria, underline, and his wife were assassinated by being shot at by a member of the Serbian terrorist organization Black Hand. Austria in return blamed Serbia for the involvement in the act and gave an ultimatum to hand over the culprit to the Austria within 48 hours only. Serbia declared its ignorance in the matter, that we are not knowing anything. How can we catch the person and hand it to you? Without listening to anything from Serbia, Austria declared war on Serbia. the First World War had begun by this incident. Page number 12. The First World War. In this First World War, 24 nations supported by the Allied nations and 4 nations supported the Axis nations. So England has always tried to express it that it has waged a war only for the best motive, and so they are known as allies or friends, and the opposite rival group are known as Axis group. So in the beginning, Germany made noteworthy victories in Europe. It ruined the French army. It also fought many submarine wars and destroyed the ships of the Allied nations. Many soldiers and civilians died because of the tanks and poisonous gases. In 1917, the Russian Revolution started, and so Russia withdrew from the First World War. Germany was very strong at that time, so it managed also to drown an American steamer, Lusitania, in which 147 American soldiers died. So, consequently, America also joined the Allied nations for the war in April 1917. America, which had not taken part in the First World War, now it also plunged. With that, now the countries like Panama, Greece, Cuba, China, and Siam also joined the Allied nations. So the strength of the Allied nations became more stronger. German army could not withstand the American troops. Now the entire position changed. Germany, which was victorious, now was defeated. German army could not withstand the American troops. Bulgaria in September 1918, Turkey and Austria in October 1918 joined the Allied nations. The German leader Kaiser abdicated his position and ran away. And so Germany had to surrender to the Allied nations and signed a ceasefire, stopped the war treaty, and the war came to an end. So this is how the First World War began and how it also ended.